Today on the TMZ Podcast.
Welcome to the TMZ Podcast. Derek and Eric here. Eric, welcome to the new studio.
This is nice. I like it.
What do you think? So don't blow it, all right? Do a good job today.
The pressure's on.
All right, we've got two big stories, and we have to lead off the day with the story that absolutely took over our website yesterday, and that is a scary one about Amanda Bynes was put on a psychiatric hold. It's called a 5150 hold in California because of an alarming incident where she was walking around downtown LA stark naked, apparently.
Right.
So she was walking around downtown LA in the early Sunday morning hours without any clothes on. We're told she waved down a cop car, and this is going to be waved a car down, I'm sorry, and this is important, and told the driver she was coming down from a psychotic episode. And Amanda that herself in the car then called 911. She was taken into a nearby police station where they had a mental health professional determine that she needed to be placed on this hold. Now, she's currently hospitalized, and she'll continue to be hospitalized until this episode passes. And maybe there will be some medication involved. Usually these psych holds are involuntary, and they can only hold you for 72 hours. But if it's a voluntary admission and you actually want to sort of progress beyond the sort of psychiatric episode, you can extend it.
Right, and that's the sort of the encouraging thing about this is that she voluntarily did it.
Yes, there was awareness.
Right,
and that's hard to find.
Also, for people who don't know, like that part of downtown LA where she was is not the best place, especially the early morning hours on a Saturday into a Sunday.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with downtown LA, the term Skid Row, a lot of people have heard of. That's in LA. There's a place there's an area of downtown LA that we call Skid Row, and there are lots of sort of tents and the homelessness problem.
And there's a lot of
drug use and crime
drugs.
and so forth. So it is a dangerous area. It's good that she had the wherewithal and the self-awareness to know that she was in trouble, and this wasn't normal, because a lot of people, when you're in the midst of an episode, don't know what's going on. They're unaware. They can be difficult to approach. Law enforcement can take them in and put them on these holds so that they don't harm themselves or others. Now, her parents, the conservatorship overlay, tell us where this is with her parents.
So remember, she famously was put in a conservatorship back in 2013 after an episode where she tried to set her neighbor's driveway on fire, almost caught her dog on fire, and the parents stepped in, drew a lot of comparisons to Britney Spears at the time, obviously. But it's a very different conservatorship, I think, and I don't think Amanda's had issues with her parents.
That's right.
Her conservatorship ended a year ago, and we're hearing her parents don't feel they need to put her back under a conservatorship, not because they don't care about her. Obviously, this is very troubling, but they, like you said, that she had that wherewithal to be like, oh, I've had a break here, and put herself under evaluation. The parents obviously will keep monitoring, but I don't think they don't feel like they need to put her back under a conservatorship.
Yeah, by all accounts, the conservatorship with Amanda, in contrast to Britney Spears, was these two loving parents without sort of the, at least open to the public dysfunction that we see with the Britney Spears situation, where her father came in and became her conservator, but her mother and father are divorced, and there's sort of issues there about what is the right thing to do for Britney. There were a lot of allegations in the Britney Spears case that you didn't hear with Amanda Bynes. They just quietly came in, steadied the ship, and now they want her to live independently. She was in cosmetology school. She went to FITM for a period of time where she seems to be into fashion and design, and things had stabilized. She had boyfriends. It seemed as though she was on the right path. But what this is a reminder of for me is that mental health is a lifelong issue. It's not a disease that you're sort of like cancer. I'm cancer-free. I'm in remission. Mental health is a very vexing problem, and it creeps up. And some of the issues are that your mental condition makes you not want to take medications. That's a very big complication with mental health. I don't know exactly what's going on with Amanda in terms of her regimen for taking whatever sort of medication she needs, but it can be a problem that over time progresses over a lifetime. And hopefully this is a blip and she'll be okay. I think people root for Amanda Bynes to be healthy.
Well, and again, like talking about like her studying cosmetology. That's a difference too with Britney, is that immediately Britney's dad was pushing her to do Vegas shows and get albums out and keep performing. Her parents, as far as we know, have not pushed her to act again or to get back out in the public. Study cosmetology, go to the Fashion Institute, like live your life and be happy. And they encouraged her in that, which is nice that they weren't.
I think that's right. She was very famous for a period of time. Not Britney Spears level of fame, but quite famous.
She was a big
in
deal.
Movies. She was a big deal on Nickelodeon. Presumably her parents sort of helped her sort of maintain a financial life that was, stable enough. It doesn't seem like they're pushing her back towards performing where there's maybe more money involved than cosmetology and FITM, because maybe she's okay and maybe she can just lead a steady life and has enough in reserve from her period of big fame. She made a lot of money.
And even the money aside, her parents might realize that's not a good environment for her to be in at this point.
It was obviously destructive, right?
She was a child star, so her parents were clearly involved in her acting career, at least early on, because she was a minor.
Yeah.
So it's not like they weren't part of that, and they don't seem like they feel the need to push her back into that.
Taking a step back from this, it seems as though Amanda Bynes may be able to pull herself out of this. I do want to have a sort of word of caution because, as I said, mental health episodes can be prolonged. And this could be the first time we see something of a sort of detour on her journey of mental health. But I am encouraged a lot by the parents talking and saying, we're not just going to rashly shove her back into a conservatorship, because even though a conservatorship is designed to steady, it can also be destructive for someone. If she were put into a mental health conservatorship, that might trigger her in a negative way. And so it's really great to see her parents sort of taking a cautious approach and saying, look, we're going to monitor this. We're very concerned about our daughter walking nude in downtown LA, but we're not going to rush to the extreme remedy of taking away her liberty. Maybe that's not warranted, because she did have the self-awareness to say, something's wrong with me. This is not right. And that is huge. That's absolutely huge. So while we're worried, and we'll obviously monitor this and the media will cover it, I think she may be able to right the ship.
I think so. And it's interesting. I knew she was under the conservatorship because remember the famous story 10 years ago. I don't think I was even aware that the conservatorship for her had ended a year ago.
It was so quiet.
There was no Free Amanda movement. There was no big court case. It seems like it was just mutual. Her parents were like, okay, you're solid now.
Yes,
like
although
we can let you go.
Although I do remember the general vibe of Britney Spears bringing conservatorships to the forefront and whether they should be prolonged for 5, 10, 15 years. That started to get people thinking about Amanda Bynes, because both of them were young women when they were put into conservatorships. Typically, like the woman from Star Trek who recently passed away,
Nichelle Nichols.
Nichelle Nichols was put into a conservatorship. We see this. I think Edie McClurg might be in a conservatorship. Those are older people who start facing dementia and really can't care for themselves. That's when conservatorships sort of make sense to people. But when they're really young and they go on for a decade or more, people have questions about that, and they certainly did about Amanda Bynes. And then it was quietly and consensually. Everyone said, okay, this is over, she's okay, and released her from the conservatorship. And it seems like her parents are willing to stick with that and not trying to get her back in. There's no court hearings about it as there are with Britney Spears. She's not suing her parents. That's certainly a better situation.
Maybe I'm forgetting some things. As far as I can remember, I don't remember Amanda Bynes ever speaking out against her parents.
Everything was just handled much more quietly and with more dignity. They seem to be a healthy family. There seems to be a lot of love there. We talked to her parents. Maybe they're together. I think they might be sort of together.
So.
And that can just be a sort of more functional environment. Maybe she grew up in a very loving home. I know Britney Spears had a more fractured upbringing. So it adds to these complexities. Let's move on to another interesting story about
family.
Music and family. Yeah. Tell me about the Isley Brothers and what is going on. Who the Isley Brothers are for our audience.
Oh, I have to explain who the Isley Brothers are.
You do.
Legends, the Isley Brothers. R&B, funk, soul, rock, everything. Back to the 50s. There's so many Isley Brothers songs that everybody knows. If you don't know, you know. And I'll get to that in a second. But they're brothers.
Actual brothers.
Not
all bands named Brothers are brothers.
That's
but
true.
The Isley Brothers are real brothers.
They are. And the Doobie Brothers, not really brothers.
That's right.
But so it was a trio originally. It was the brothers O'Kelley, Rudolph, and Ronald. O'Kelley died back in the 80s. And so now Rudolph is suing Ronald because Rudolph says that we had an agreement, and I don't know if it's a legal agreement or a spoken agreement. We'll get into that.
This will be key, yes.
But Rudolph says that he and Ronald split 50-50 ownership of the Isley Brothers and all profits.
Right. He's saying one brother died, it was a third, but then the brother died, it should be 50-50.
And now he's saying back in August of last year, he's found out that Ronald petitioned to get sole ownership of the Isley Brothers' name and trademark and all the profits off of that. And now he is suing to get 50% of whatever Ronald's made since last August and to get his name back on. I get half of it.
Now, the breakout Isley Brothers, just to explain to people, is Ron Isley. Ron Isley is sort of the, how would we describe him? The Barry Gibb of the Isley Brothers, right?
He had solo hits and became the face of the group. He is the most, and Rudolph retired from performing in like 1989.
You're right.
So
and that's key too. That's
yes.
referenced in the lawsuit. After O'Kelley dies in '86, Rudolph sort of started to recede from the Isley brothers. Now, in his lawsuit, I read these documents last night. He says he continued to manage the Isley brothers and had a role in administrating sort of the edifice of the entity. And he's saying that for a reason. He's saying, look, I should still be cut in on the process, on the profits of all this, because I'm part of the Isley brothers, whether or not I'm out there performing like Ron does.
Right. Yeah, Ron
would
kept it going, basically. And
Right.
they had hits up into the early 2000s.
Yes.
Their song Contagious, which R. Kelly factors a lot into the resurgence of the Isley brothers.
Sure.
But still, they had a top 20 hit in 2001.
Right.
And their first hit was 1959. Like, that's a pretty good span.
And Rudolph is not a pip. I mean, he would you know what I'm saying? He's not like a background singer. They were the Isley brothers. They sang together.
Right. So I don't know what the legal agreement, or was it like a spoken thing or an agreement between them as brothers, or was it in writing? Because if it was in writing that we have 50-50, then I don't know what case Ronald would have for trying to.
Well, there's an answer to this.
At this point.
According to the lawsuit, and you have to take that all with a grain of salt because Ron Isley will have his own version of events. But according to Rudolph, there was sort of an initial partnership amongst the brothers that was maybe oral and not clearly defined. Over the years, as the Isley brothers got bigger, there were written documents, and he alludes to them in his lawsuit. He says there was this arrangement about profits from merchandise. There was this arrangement about other things, and he makes it sound like Ron, on his own, recently, as last year, went to the Patent and Trademark Office and under his own name said, I want to own the Isley brothers. Maybe there was a rift that was brewing, and maybe he's being a little bit disingenuous, Rudolph, over how unbeknownst it was, because there's some letter correspondence where they say, like, hey, I saw you filed this thing. What does it mean? And Ron Isley's saying, well, it means exactly what it says. I basically am the Isley brothers. I'm happy to work with you, but you don't do anything since 1980s. You haven't come out and performed with us. Why should you get 50-50? And also, what is 50-50? What about O'Kelley? If anything, we had a third arrangement. I don't know why you all of a sudden get 50% of things.
And I don't know,
singing.
Did O'Kelley have children? Is there an estate there that would be entitled to a good chunk of at least
That's a great point.
His decades with the group?
Yeah,
so,
you could see sort of Ron siding with the O'Kelley estate to say, like, what's Rudolph doing? We're a threesome, even though you passed away.
And it's also interesting that they're in their 80s.
Yes.
Ronald is 81. Rudolph is 83 now. And be fighting over these profits into your 80s, it shouldn't have to be that way.
I agree. To see families start to litigate with one another, because remember, there's a lot of conflict that is solved outside of a courtroom. I have fights with my wife all the time. You can have fights with friends. You don't drag people to court unless things are quite serious. And when money is involved, it does tend to get very nasty, because the Isley brothers, it's a very valuable name, regardless of whether they perform currently. They got a lot of
well, that's the
songs
thing
in the
too. Is
catalog.
and I'm sure this is like generational wealth at this point. They're thinking about their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren at this point.
Right.
So the Isley brothers, I was asking you earlier, which of their songs you could name, and you were struggling a bit.
So the
I know
song
you know
I know,
some.
didn't they do a cover of Summer Breeze that became very popular? It's the Stills and
but
Cross
that's
song.
So back to their first big hit in the 50s was Shout.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You make me wanna shout. That's the Isley
pretty
brothers.
big one. If you
Twist
see
and
Ferris
Shout,
Bueller.
they did that before the Beatles did it.
Oh, they covered
They
that
did
before the
Fight the
Beatles.
Power. They did Who's That Lady? And then the thing that really keeps their revenue going now, in the 90s, all the samples.
Yes.
So Today Was a Good Day by Ice Cube. That entire track is Footsteps in the Dark by the Isley Brothers, and they get a chunk of that money.
That's huge.
Big Papa by Notorious B.I.G. That whole thing is their song Between the Sheets.
Really?
Which was also Functified by DeBrat. It was Luxurious by Gwen Stefani. Megan Thee Stallion sampled that song. Chris Brown has sampled that song.
Wow.
Nelly sampled it. So they have all this income because they have songwriting credits and publishing credits on a giant chunk of hits from the 90s and 2000s and 2010s to this day.
That's how I learned about Ron Isley, is a shout out in an old Warren G song where there's a song called Smoking Me Out. Do you ever hear this song?
Yeah, I remember Smoking
And
Me
he
Out.
shouts out Ron Isley. He's like, Ron Isley, and you sort of like hear his voice. And as a kid, I was like, who the hell is that? And you start to look them up and look into their music.
I remember when I was young, Rod Stewart's song, This Old Heart of Mine, which is a cover of an Isley Brothers song. Rod Stewart featured Ronald on the cover.
God.
And I was like, who's this old guy with Rod? Because I thought Rod Stewart was an old guy. Who's this even older guy? But then also, this is why I got to mention R. Kelly. He was a huge fan of the Isley Brothers. And in the 90s, when R. Kelly was the #1 producer and artist in music, sampled the crap out of the Isley Brothers, remade them. Aaliyah's song At Your Best, that's an Isley Brothers song. Then he did the song Down Low featuring Ron Isley. So the Isley Brothers have, over decades, lots of songs that bring in lots of revenue.
Yes.
So I can see why Rudolph's like, give me a chunk of that.
There's big money at stake. And in the documents, the last thing I'll say is there was apparently Ron is going to say something along the lines of, I bought you out, because there was this $2 million that Rudolph got from Ron. And Ron's like, I had to liquidate a bunch of holdings and gave you that $2 million, even though I might have entitlement to some of it. There's some correspondence back and forth where he might say, hey, Rudolph, you knew this was coming. I didn't go behind your back. So, it could get nasty. We'll continue to monitor the case, but to see brother against brother, I mean, it is biblical, frankly. It's like Cain and Abel. It's awful to see.
If Cain and Abel were in their 80s.
Cain and Abel in their 80s and had lots of R&B hits, that would be this lawsuit. All right, that'll do it for us today. We'll continue to monitor Amanda Bynes' situation and the Isley brothers, and we'll see you guys next time.